Your worship team. Are you glad to be here this morning? Amen. If you're glad to be here online, just raise your thumb. This is audience participation. That way you don't feel left out. Today's beautiful and priceless parable is referred to by most as the prodigal son story, along with two other parables in that same chapter, chapter 15 of Luke. We discover that there's one thing in common in all these three parables, and it is simply this: that lost things matter to God. No matter how small or insignificant they may be, they're precious in God's eyes. And so, as I was preparing for this message, there's just so much you can learn. It's just so rich. One author said, when we read Luke chapter 15, we discover that it's almost like the gospel within a gospel. It's just that good. When you read the prodigal son story, it's a pearl of all the parables. That's just how priceless it really is. So I pray that as you hear this story again, maybe you're very familiar with this story, you'll again be reminded that God operates in the economy of grace, not shame. And today, as we look at it, although we could look at so many aspects of this story, I want to in particular look at the Father's eyes of love. Because you see, when you really take everything into account, you realize that the real hero of the story is not the prodigal son, it's the Father. It's the Father in the story. And so we can learn a great deal from our God, who is a spiritual Father, on how we can deal with our children, because life is not easy. In fact, life is hard. And so as we read God's story, we discover that we are not exempt, and nor were many other faithful people, whether it was Adam, Noah, Samuel, Eli, Job, Daniel, David. They all had to deal with this idea of parenting God's way, and it's still happening to us today. So if you are a parent, you might ask yourself, is your child like the younger son or like the older son? Or a combination of both? Hopefully neither. If you're an adult, you might ask yourself, is your life reflected by the lives of these two sons? Is your life as a parent reflected by the father's approach to parenting? You see, long before I ever became a pastor, Nellie and I were going through our parenting storms. And it was not easy. It was the most difficult thing I ever experienced in my life. As most of you know, I inherited 4 boys. I was a stepfather, and I had heard all kinds of war stories about how stepdads were bad. But as a spiritual man, I said, well, I'm gonna demonstrate what a spiritual stepfather was like. But little did I know the testing that I would undergo to earn that parent title. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Imagine as you parent, you have a child who's on drugs. Imagine that your own child is stealing from you in your own home. Imagine that your child takes your car without your permission. That your child is the one who's homeless. That your child is in jail. That your child is in the hospital due to bad decisions. That your child loses their home, loses their marriage, loses their cars, loses everything in their life. And you're going, how can this be? This is my child. And it hurts because you realize that it not only affects your child, but it affects you. And so we had to earn our stripes of parenting. Praise be to the God and God alone that we can say those days are gone and behind us, but we had to live through them. You see, the fact that you are a spiritual parent does not mean that you will be exempt from having a child that will go astray from your family. And so as we look at this story today, I want you to notice there are 3 stages that this young boy goes through. He goes through a stage of rebellion, a stage of regret and reflection, and even a reevaluation, and then finally the stage of return. I want you to notice there are 3 things that we need to do while we're waiting and they are astray. There are 3 things that we also need to do when they finally come back and return. I think all of us would agree that when you hear that child say to you, give me, and they're an adult now, they're not the 3-year-old, you realize and you wonder, did I really do a good job? And you know as well as I do that there is a constant power play relationship between you and your kids. It's a power struggle where who's really in control, and they pull and you pull back. Yes, at the very beginning you had total control, 100%, but as they grow older, you have to let go of the ropes some more and give them more room to learn how to do life as you're trying to show them by your example. But at some point, you may discover that they want unlimited control quicker than you can give it. And as we read this classic confrontation here in verse 12, it simply says, Father, give me my share. I'm sure you've heard that in different words. We don't know how old he was. He could have been 17 or 18. But it says in verse 13 that this younger boy, the younger son, packed up everything he owned, everything. And he left for a foreign country. It wasn't enough to move across the street. He's going to go get as far as he can from mom and dad. And when he gets there, what's he going to do? Where he wasted all the money in wild living. It didn't say that he head off to seminary and mom and dad are just in applause. I think dad had a feeling this was going to happen. I have a feeling that he had impulses that this boy was going to be troublesome, that there were signs, there were warning signs, there was flags all throughout his upbringing. And so when he finally does leave and he leaves, he heads off to the Sunset Strip, if you know what I'm saying. Not to Big D, but to Big J, Jerusalem, where all the action is at. And he's cruising down Sin Boulevard on his Camelot, and he's having the party of his life. I mean, these are the best days that he's been dreaming about, because before I couldn't do what I wanted. I had to follow my boss, who was my dad. He told me when I got up, when I laid down, it was just rules, rules, rules. And now I'm in charge. I'm going to call the shots. This is my party, and I don't have to worry about mom and dad. He's having a great time doing all the things he ever dreamed of and always wanted to do. Of course, today's kids in our modern world, they can easily jump on a plane, fly to Las Vegas, and live totally and completely different lives. Mom and dad have no idea what's going on. After all, what's done in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. That's not true. God's not unaware of what's going on there. And of course, we know that because things have changed a lot, we have these things called cars, and they can just simply hop in the car and, okay, fine, I won't go to Las Vegas, I'll just go across town. And so they do that, and they do what they want to do because they're in control. And what are you going to do when they're finally an adult and they say, I'm leaving Dodge City? 3 things. And the first one will be the hardest. It may be one that you have yet to do. Maybe you've done it, but it will be the hardest. But unless you do the first one, you can forget about the other 2. Because the first one is when you have to just realize you have to let them go. It reads in verses 12b to 13a, so the father divided his property between his 2 sons, which I did find interesting that it's the one son that's asking, but now he's giving it to both. Not long after that, the younger son packed up, and what does he do? He leaves for another country. Now, when I was growing up in a little small rural town of about 10,000 people called Sweetwater, Texas, I know most of you have been there because it's really, it's a great town, to be honest with you. But as I was growing up, my parents were good parents. They were godly parents. They tried to do the best they could on what was right. I couldn't even bring a girlfriend to step foot in my bedroom. That's how guided it was. But I was surprised that I met this kid in high school, and he said, oh man, life is good. I said, well, what happened? He says, I just had my girlfriend moved in with me. And I said, did you say your girlfriend moved in with you? He said, yeah. I said, wow, I've never heard anything like that. He's like, well, my parents didn't want me to move out, quit school, and get a job and, get married with this girl. I'm too young. I don't know what I'm doing. So instead, they said, just bring the girl in, and she can live with us. I thought it was the most radical thing I had ever heard. Now, we're talking back in the 70s, if you know what I'm saying. But you see, in this story, this father is not willing to compromise his standards, his idea of holiness for his children's selfish desires. Neither did he get angry, and did he say to him, well, you're going to regret this the rest of your life. In fact, on your way out, don't let the door hit you on the back. He didn't do that. He just honorably said okay and gave him his money, and he was on his way. And so I want you to understand That it's not about protecting the family name as much as your family name may mean. It's about depending on the name of Jesus. Because that is the real question. You see, in Proverbs 19:18, God tells us, discipline your children while they are young enough to learn. If you don't, you are helping them destroy themselves. You see, God gives us a free will, and He will not manipulate it. He will say, you decide what's best for you, and I'm telling you what's best for you, but you may not be willing to accept it, and I am willing to accept that you're not going to accept me, because my love for you is unwavering despite your decisions. And so what happens then is God is telling us, He's forewarning us, listen, coach, model, guide, exemplify what it means to do life the best way there is before they leave your home. It's about building their character, and sometimes it may not be easy. I remember the first time I told Logan he was going to have to mow the back lawn. He wasn't overjoyed for some reason. I thought he'd be jumping for joy. And it can be hard to figure this thing out. How tight do I hold on? How much rope do I give them? You know, it takes a lot of wisdom, doesn't it, to figure out every child is different. And you give one a lot of freedom and they don't abuse it. You give one 2 inches and they abuse the entire 2 inches worth of freedom. And so you're learning to how to do this thing, but you'll discover that if you hold on too tight and you hold them too close, that they will resist, and eventually when they have the opportunity, they will explode on you because they could not handle that kind of control. And so we have to learn how to do this thing of dealing with our kids and showing them the right way. And sometimes it may even require them making their mistakes. So you let them go, and secondly, you let them make their own mistakes. It's the hardest thing to come to grips with, that they're going to make mistakes. I mean, think about it. Are you going to let your child run across the street when he's 4 years old? Absolutely not. Are you going to let them run freely all across the playground? Yes. But what if they fall? It's part of life. They'll get back up. They'll learn something from it. Watch out for that little protruding piece of concrete there, because you can trip on it, and guess what happens? Exactly that. And so you're learning that sometimes the only way they're going to learn is through the mistakes of life and not the counsel that you gave them. Notice again, the passage reads, he wasted all his money in while living. Now, something tells me that while living didn't mean Bible studies, fellowship meetings. Some just tell me this is something different here. In fact, his brother threw in his words, and he said, your son wasted your money, let's get specific, on prostitutes. You see, ultimately, our children will make their own decisions, whether we like it or not. We cannot always protect our kids from everything. As they grow up, they have to learn sometimes by personal experience, and sometimes the hard way too. Proverbs 14:12 reads, some people think they are doing right, but in the end it leads to death. Yes. Some of their choices, which are not so good, will have to be tested the hard way, because you've said it 100 times, but they still don't embrace your counsel. And so what does he do? He's having the time of his life. He tries everything that mom and dad said he couldn't do. He said, that's what I'm going to do. This is my opportunity. This is my privilege to try it out. And he's trashing his parents' value system. He totally disregards his upbringing. See, but I have a hunch that the dad knew that the only thing that could break his son's stubbornness was pain and suffering. It was the only thing that was probably going to get his attention. It was hitting bottom that would somehow convert itself into a surrendering to God opportunity. Were there risk? Absolutely. But God knows what the extent of the damage will be. And so we work the process. And so we let them go. We let them make their mistakes. And thirdly, we let them experience the consequences of their choices. Proverbs 20, verse 30. It reads, sometimes it takes a painful situation, the NIV puts it this way, blows and wounds, to make us change our ways. Notice what happened in this story. It said he had spent everything when a bad famine spread through that whole land. Soon he had nothing to eat. He went to work for a man in that country. Now he has a job. And the man sent him out to take care of the pigs, his pigs. He would have been glad to eat what the pigs were eating, but no one gave him a thing. In other words, things finally caught up with him. Things eventually catch up with us. You see, the good life was over, the bad life has now begun. The music has faded, the lights are back up, the friends are gone, the party is over, the women are nowhere to be found. Now his pockets are empty, his stomach is empty, and life seems empty. How many of you have learned it the hard way? Okay, that's all three of you, and the rest are probably lying, but got to forgive you. And you're going, I can't raise my hand. My kid's sitting in the auditorium. They might see that. That's the best thing you could do. To be honest with your kids. And say, you know what? There were some things I had to learn the hard way. And so, one psychologist said, if I had to do it over again, you know, this whole parenting thing, I would do less for my kids and make them do more for themselves. Now think about that. Does that sound like your parenting approach today? Every time that we take away responsibility from our kids, we take it away from them, and eventually they're going to rebel because they think, I thought I could just do whatever I wanted. But when they rebel, it will then come with a high price tag. So much higher than the one you were giving them was. In fact, doesn't God warn us about this in Galatians chapter 6, 7 through 8? Paul writes, don't be misled. Remember that you can't ignore God and get away with it. You will always reap what you sow. Notice that word, always. Those who live only to satisfy their own sinful desires will harvest the consequences of decay and death. You see, God is such a loving God that he would first give us counsel. He would rather advise us, instruct us. But if that doesn't work, then he's willing to release us to learn from the heat. Now, nobody likes to get burned. Nobody likes consequences. And yet God says, listen, I will let you go, but let's be clear about one thing. Your decisions will come with consequences. You can choose your decisions, but you cannot pick the consequences that are going to follow as a result of those bad decisions. And so he finds himself in a pig pen, experiencing hardship and pain and suffering. And what are the parents going through? The parents are worried. They're hurt. They're crying. Maybe sometimes they're angry. Maybe other times they're embarrassed. They feel like failures as parents. What did we do wrong? You see, all of us as parents make mistakes, don't we? And you see, we're not the only influence of our kids' lives. We try to control things, but we don't have control of some of the things that influence them, like books and teachers and technology and media and culture. So it's not fair for you to say, well, it's all my fault. No, that's not true. You cannot blame yourself entirely as the reason for the outcome of your kids. You see, the enemy, our accuser, who's good at it, he will make it his business to make sure that you conclude that it's your fault. He's good at false guilt. But parental responsibility ended where the parents' responsibility and control ended. You have no control over their actions when you release them. They moved out. How could you be responsible? You see, God understands this. Isn't God a faithful parent? And what kind of kids does he have? Some of them are very rebellious. God understands. So don't feel guilty over something you can't control. Now, this is a very hard but necessary truth. When they hit bottom, we'll be tempted to intervene. We'll want to go bail them out at the jailhouse. We'll want to immediately send them some money. We'll want to assume control once again. But this father, he never steps in. You know why? Because he knows that the spiritual father is at work. He knows that God is speaking to his son in ways that he could not. He knows that if he steps in, he's going to mess it up, and they will not reap the consequences by which God will speak to them clearly. Now, I realize that some of us may have some kids that are hurting. And you might want to be the rescuer, the healer. But you cannot get in the way of God showing them how to face their own consequences. I speak not as just an orator or somebody who has spent some time in the Word and can speak with truth. I've lived it. It was not fun discovering my son sitting in his car after having or attempted to commit suicide on prescription drugs. It was not a fun moment for me. But God used that experience to speak to him. Did I call the ambulance? Yes. Did I go to the hospital? Yes. Did we still love him? Yes. And so the key is unwavering love. So we have to accept that even though we don't know what it means when we talk consequences, that we need to let the consequences be. Yes, it could mean spending the night in jail. It could mean an unwanted pregnancy. It could mean a drug addiction. It could mean prison time, loss of a job. So many devastating kinds of things. We don't like those things. But can I be honest with you? Do we really have control? No. But you know who we can trust to be in control? The spiritual Father, who is still at work, who is still speaking even through pain, if that's what it takes. Notice what happened in verse 17 to 19, because now we see a flip of the switch. We're no longer do we see rebellion, now we see regret, now we see reflection, now we see repentance. When he came to his senses, it says, he said, how many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food, and here I am dying of hunger? I'll get up, go to my father, and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired workers. See, when he left, he said, give me. When he comes back, he says, make me. Do you see the change of attitude? Do you see how God has used pain and suffering to develop a change of heart? He has an attitude of submission now. He sees the damage he's done to himself, to his parents, and to God. He's saying, in modern terms, what have I done? I've messed up my life. I'm now living in a stinky pig pen. I've lost my money, my food, my so-called friends, my reputation. I've lost everything. Even my dad's servants have it better than me. He's woke up to the nightmare he created for himself. You see, once a child feels the pain, they are more open to reevaluate the situation. They're more open to consider the very advice that they ignored before. Have you noticed that sometimes we're not ready for change until we are in a desperate state? Have you noticed that? You see, for some kids, it don't take much. I was the kid that it didn't take much. My brother, he was the other extreme. Same family, same parents. He just finally saw the light within the last year. Some kids get it, and it only takes a little heat. Other kids, they're going to have to hit bottom. They're going to have to hit their head to wake them up, for them to say, hey, wait a second, this is no fun. See, that's the good news. That God brings good out of bad. As ugly as bad may be. So what does he do? He says, I'm going to go back home. Not for a change of clothes, not to ask for some money. I'm going home because I've had a change of heart. And the parents had nothing to do with it. Something tells me someone was praying for this son. You with me? Didn't Don talk about that last week? And so, what do you do then while they're astray? 3 very quick things. Pray to God, nonstop, with persistence, just like it was laid out last week's in Pastor Don's message. You pray without season. You never stop praying. Your kids are under a real attack by the devil and his demons. They do have a plan. And so you need to have a plan. And your plan is you're going to pray. But secondly, you're going to commit your child to God. You're going to say, God, I don't have control, but it's not totally out of your control. And so I am passing the baton and telling you, Lord, do what only you can do. And thirdly, you wait patiently with God. You wait, and you wait, and you wait. It may be a week, it may be a month, it may be a year, it may be many years, it may be the rest of your life. My dad died before he saw my brother return. But his prayers were not in vain. And so you let God to do what only God can do in his discipline. And you pray and you commit and you wait. And what do you do when they finally come back? How are you going to handle that? Let's look at the story. So he got up and went to his father, but while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. Remember, this is the ideal father. This is God. He's the perfect parents. We're not exactly perfect. So we can do 3 things like the father. We love them faithfully. It says his father saw him and was filled with compassion. No matter how far his son fell away from him, no matter how long he had to wait, No matter how many sins in the good book he violated, the Father's stubborn love continued. He loved him long before he strayed away. He loved him when he strayed away. He loved him even when he came back. His love was unwavering. It never stopped. It never quit. It was sustained through the entire relationship. And what do? We've got to learn to love in the same way. Secondly, we have to learn how to accept them unconditionally and affectionately. Again, it says he ran out and threw his arms around his neck and kissed him. This is a very moving picture of acceptance for a man to even run to his child, which was not common in that culture. You see, he didn't wait for his son to get all the way back home. The dad says, I'm going to meet him on the way. He saw him coming from a distance, and he runs to him, and he didn't say, hey, so good you're back, Leroy, but let's stop right there. Let's just make it clear. I want to make it very clear. There are some conditions for you to come back home. Is that what happened? No. He didn't say, first of all, man, you stink, so you go take a bath first, right? And your hair looks a little matty. You've probably been in the pig slop the way it looks, so let's go get those lice taken care of. He didn't say, well, you know what, I told you so I guess now you've learned your lesson. None of that happened. Here's a kid that's been humbled. Here's a kid that didn't eat pig, didn't touch pigs, and now he's lived with the pigs. God spoke through the pigs. He probably came back. He knew he didn't look well, smell well, etc. But something tells me he had a memory of his dad that said, you know what? I have a feeling that even though I've done him wrong, and even though I'm okay with him making me a servant, that he's going to accept me. That he'll do the right thing. And what does he do? Exactly that. He confirmed what he suspected would happen with his dad. You see, there's something beautiful about this story. It's called the language of love. Not just emotionally, but physically. My dad didn't grow up with a dad. He didn't have a dad. My dad didn't know a whole lot about how to interact with us three siblings. He was not very physically touching. And you know what? We were physically touching with him, and guess what? He learned from us, and he touched us back. We have to learn how to put our arm around our kids, how to pat them on the back, how to pat them on the chest, how to give them a kiss on the forehead. You know, somehow, if we're ashamed as real men to show our emotions, what God gave us, something is wrong. Why? Is it pride? Whatever it is, it's not love. Because here we see a picture of the Heavenly Father says, I physically embrace my children. It breaks down barriers. Have you ever noticed that when a kid does something wrong and they come back, and you don't give them a sermon, okay? Don't give them a sermon. Why? Because life has given them the sermon. You don't need to say anything else. What's the greatest lesson of all? Top it off. It's love. It's not you broke this rule and you did this and you did that. You know what they need in their lives? They need love. God's way. And so, show it by accepting them. Show it by being affectionate with them. It says again, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make it easy for them to come back. And you might even consider, God is perfect. But as a parent, have you made some mistakes? Now would be a good time to say, you know what, son? I've let you down. As a parent, I messed up. My priorities were off. You see, the son is coming back, and the son needs to know that there is nothing more important than that love relationship. And you're willing to be humble enough to say, I didn't get it right. So I own up to my part in this process. Lastly, forgive them completely. Forgive them completely. When they come home, you completely cancel the record against them. Notice again the story. But the father told his servants, quick, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. Then bring the fattened calf and slaughter it, and let's celebrate with a feast, because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. But what if he wrecked and totaled the Camelot? That's costly. What if the reputation of our name is in the gutter now? What about this? What about that? About 27 years ago, I had a really nice 12-speed. It cost me about $600. I bought it in the mid-'70s. It was a really nice racing bike. And of course, I was a single when I bought it and got married. Inherited 4 boys. And so I thought, I'll just put it in the patio screen, and if they want to borrow it, I'll let them borrow it. But one day I came home and the bike was gone. And I told Nellie, like, hey, did you leave the door to the patio screen area unlocked? Like, my bike is gone. Of course, asked all the boys, like, no, I didn't take it. So I never knew what happened to that bike. At first it hurt, because that was an expensive bike. And then 3 years ago, I was teaching on forgiveness, and my oldest son was in that group. We was a discipling group. And after the talk, he came to me with tears. He said, Dad, I'm the one who stole your bike. You took the bike? My bike from way back when? He said, yep, I'm the one who took it. I wanted to get to my friend's house, and I didn't want to walk over there, so I took your bike, and then I left it outside the house, and somebody came and took it, and so somebody else stole it after I stole it. Yeah. So I said, well, you just wait right here. I need to go get my whip. No. I said, son, I really appreciate you being honest about something that happened so long ago that I even forgot about it already. But I want you to know that it took a lot of courage for you to stand here before me and say, I did it. I was wrong. I'm sorry. And I said, I want you to know that you're fully and totally and completely forgiven. It didn't happen. You know what I was trying to tell him? I was trying to tell him, no bike, no matter how much it costs, is more valuable than him to me. I care about you more than any bike. And we cried together a little bit. It wasn't for the dollars that were lost, okay? But it's because I realized this is what forgiveness really looks like. You let it go. You let God. You see, isn't that God for us? He doesn't rub it in. He rubs it out. He doesn't say, I told you so. I knew this was going to happen, even though he knows. He never says you're a complete failure. He just doesn't do that. And so we can learn. And he puts that robe on him. Why? That robe meant you're part of the family. He puts that ring on his finger. Why? Because that ring was important. You stamp something with the wax that has that emblem of the family on that ring, it means something. It'd be like giving a kid a credit card and says, like, okay, here's your credit card back. Now you have the responsibility that you lost and were abusive of before. It's now yours. And so he says, put sandals on. Why? The servants, some of the servants didn't wear shoes. They were barefooted. And he's saying, okay, look, you're barefooted. You're not a servant. You're my son. Get him some sandals. So what is the dad saying? He's saying you are fully restored with all the privileges of being my son. That's the gospel. Meanwhile, we have an older brother in the back of this story. See, this older brother was blinded by pride and his own self-righteousness. Sounds kind of religious, don't it? He was close to the Father's hand, but he was not close to the Father's heart. And he doesn't understand that to be faithful to the dad is to also say, hey, Dad, like, I really want to look like you. I want to really be like you. But no, he's complaining and saying, well, hey, look at me and look at my brother. It's obvious who has special privileges here. He's nothing like the dad. You see, he's living at home, and he is just as spiritually dead as the son who's out with the prostitutes. Are you listening, parents? Well, I'd rather him live with us, so at least at least he's home and I can feed him, I can watch his clothes, I can kind of oversee him, have a little control. You may be raising a spiritually dead son. Listen to what God is saying. There comes a time where you have to let go. Let them make mistakes. Let them reap their consequences. Let God do what you can't. That's tough love. That's what we see in this story. And so the jury is still out on that older son of this story, and the jury is still out on one of my sons. As we close today, maybe you're sitting here, you're going like, man, I'm like one of those boys. I've messed up. Maybe you're like the older son. I've been living two lives. Maybe I'm the rebellious one. I don't care. I'll do whatever I want. But listen to what God is saying. What God is saying, this is what really matters. I love you. Come home. Come home. Because what I have for you is love and acceptance and forgiveness, regardless. So before we close today's service, I want you to think through this next song. Having heard God's word, maybe this song needs to be a song of praise, given your circumstances. Or maybe this song needs to be a song of confession and say, yeah, that sounds like my life story. I don't know. But give to God whatever he wants to accomplish with your life through this last worship song. And then I'll come up and I'll close us out in prayer. Let's stand as we worship the Lord together.